So Josh, come on, sit down. Friday, September 15th, 2023. What are we doing?
We are doing a podcast called Body, Mind, Evolution, and we're going to be looking at the sort of coevolution of our diet, our exercise, and our consciousness. And we're going to start off with the beginning of our evolution as we split off from chimpanzees. So my name is Dr. Josh Stout. I'm a teacher of human evolution and Darwinian medicine and human physiology at Fairleigh Dickinson University. And I really think that we haven't really looked at the way consciousness has evolved along with the evolution of the body. And I think my students in particular have seemed very interested in how this affects our diet and our exercise and the way our body has developed over the last, let's say, 6 million years. And I wanted to start off the story with how we left the rainforest and went on to the Serengeti, and what that did to our physiology, how we developed as we became bipeds. So there's a couple of things that humans are particularly unique in our physiology, and one of those things is being a biped. But we have to think about what we were before that. So we were eating fruit. We were maybe traveling for about a mile or so every day, looking for fruit as chimpanzees, and everything was wonderful in the jungle. And then about 6 million years ago, there was a tremendous increase in volcanic activity, and the African continent started to rip apart, causing huge upthrust of mountains, which caused a rain shadow, and the jungle that we lived in started to turn into a grassland. And so suddenly we were thrown from being a sort of happy-go-lucky chimpanzees, if you could see it that way, into a group of primates that had to really work hard to get our food. We had to walk long distances, or at first it would have been some sort of maybe all fours or knuckle walking.
How quickly did this transition take place?
As far as the fossil record is concerned, basically instantaneously. So first there were chimpanzees, and then there was a collection of things that could basically walk on two legs that were like chimpanzees. Chimpanzee body walking on two legs.
This couldn't have happened in thousands of years.
Well, it's very unclear when the exact moment would have been. There was everything from could have started 12 million years ago. The consensus is around 6 million years ago. And we start seeing the first, really convincing there are ancestors in our line around 4 million years ago. Mm-hmm. So there's a 2 million year wide question mark where a bunch of different strategies are being tried. So some animals, some early hominins are going to be walking on the tops of their feet. Others have really long toes, so they can climb trees well, but they can't really run because they can't bend their toes. There's a lot of different things that are happening.
And this is all happening in reaction to the changing of the land.
So now the whole point is that our food is now really spread out. We can't just go from fruit tree to fruit tree. Climbing is still important because as apes out on the Serengeti, we are slower than everything else out there, and everything can eat us. So climbing trees is really, really important. We spend a lot of time, probably every night, we're sleeping in the trees. We get up in the morning, and then we have to walk a long distance. And walking became sort of central to what made us us. Over the next couple of million years.
Here we go. Okay.
So we evolved to this sort of continuous movement every day, 4 or 5 miles a day of walking, as opposed to less than a mile that the chimpanzees would have been doing. And then when we got to our food, it was going to be very different. Instead of just reaching up and plucking a fruit or climbing a tree and eating the fruit in the tree, now we had to dig for tubers. And so we actually have a very strong upper body that is evolved from the chimpanzees. So a chimpanzee can swing from branches. We can't swing from branches anymore because we don't have the fingers for it. Our fingers have become shorter. We'll talk about that later. These ones still would have had nice long fingers, so they could climb a tree very well. Some of them had long toes, so they could climb trees, but that slowed down their walking. But the strong upper body with good shoulder bones and upper back strength meant that we could dig as well. And so even though chimpanzees don't do a lot of digging, we are pre-adapted for that. We had a good musculature, so we could pull up plants, we could eat the underground stems, we could eat the underground tubers and roots. And we started to change the physiology of our skull as well. So our jaws became much, much thicker with thicker teeth, thicker tooth enamel. Strangely, chimpanzee teeth are very sharp, but they have thin tooth enamel. They're not nearly as strong as ours. Ours are sort of flat, and we have molars that look like molars, as opposed to sort of pointy teeth in the back of a chimpanzee's mouth. And so we became specialists at grinding our food and walking long distances. And so this is where I would say our need for both continuous exercise and fiber comes in. We had spent most of our days either chewing fiber or walking, and our jaws became tremendously thick. Some of these groups were called Nutcracker Man. They had huge jaws that could crack through almost anything. Possibly some of it might have been used for scavenging. Anything that would have provided a source of calories would have been useful. So there might have been some dried meats, but there's not a lot of assumption that we were doing any large amounts of hunting at this time. We would have been much more scavenging, digging roots, and getting our calories mostly from carbohydrates, but in very complex forms. Mm-hmm. So in root form, basically. Right. No fire, no cooking.
Uncooked. Just gnashed together.
Chewed. Lots of chewing. Yeah, a lot of chewing. And so we had ridges on the tops of our skulls where our jaw muscles connected. We had...
That's what that was about.
Yeah. And we had teeth that were about 2 or 3 times the size of ours today. But the interesting thing is, that thick tooth enamel, we actually still have inherited. So we very much have kept that general physiology for chewing as much as we have for walking long distances. Now, obviously, humans aren't the only thing that can chew, but we are definitely the only thing that can walk like bipeds the way we do. And so that has shaped a lot of our movement. I like to think about sort of the mental map of the time as well, where we would have been in small groups. Chimpanzees can be as many as maybe 70 in a troop. And we probably would have been moving out on the Serengeti in small groups, protecting a large territory as a larger group. So maybe something like small family groups working together. It's obviously speculation, but if you're imagining an ape with few natural defenses, there must have been some way to band together and work with each other. So this would have also been the beginning of forming not exactly a society, but of working together to gain calories. As our brains are getting bigger, we can't survive without additional calories. The diet that a single female could gather for herself probably would have not been sufficient to feed herself and a baby as well, and certainly not a baby and a toddler. So there would have had to have been groups working together to do some limited scavenging and digging of tubers and traveling under those conditions, usually for hours a day. And we became specialists at not using a lot of calories, which is part of the problem today. So we get so fat so easily because we have such highly attuned insulin systems that turns every calorie we get, if we possibly can, into stored fat, so we can get through these hard times where we've been stuck out on the grasslands. And so we became specialists at not speed, but endurance. And so we can walk further than a chimpanzee, but we can't outrun one. We can dig for longer than a chimpanzee, but we'd lose in an arm wrestling contest. So we lost strength and gained tremendous amounts of endurance and a whole physiology that's dedicated to storing calories. and to holding on to every calorie we can possibly get. And a physiology that essentially forces us to go out and get extra just so we can make it through the hard times that are coming. And it's actually interesting. There are parts of Africa where they've taken a series of sort of the average subsistence farmers' weights over the course of the year, and you can see during the rainy season when crops are abundant, they'll gain a couple of kilos and then lose them again during the dry season. So we really were adapted for this kind of eating everything you possibly can when you can, and then just suffering and looking for more food while you can't find it. And so we would just walk and walk and walk till we found food, dig as much food as we could, and then just eat and eat and eat and eat until there was no food left, and then walk to the next place. And so this is, in many ways, sort of governed our attitude. We like to eat with other people. It makes us feel safer because we're in a group. We're much less likely to have a saber-toothed tiger come up behind you and eat you. And
we're inclined to finish every single thing.
And we're inclined to finish every single thing. There's actually absolutely a social component of it. And
there's all sorts of contemporary psychology.
Yeah. That
getting you to not do that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's we would like to be mindful of what we're eating, but if you think about how we would first approach food, it would be just eat it. If you find it, eat it. It doesn't matter what it is. Eat it now quickly and move on, because there might be something else looking for that food, not least another one of our own species, right? So we would have been territorial. We know chimpanzee has war, so there would have been competition with other groups, and there would have been a lot of possible strife if they found you with a high resource food item. So you would eat it as quickly as possible and move on. And that was very much our life. We would not have had any kind of permanent settlements, but we would have had a territory that we were roaming very long distances to guard the entire territory. Which probably would have had fixed resources. So our brains were slightly larger than a chimpanzee's, but we could imagine what was under the ground. We could imagine that it was growing. We could imagine when the rainy season came, that the tubers would be...
How did this capacity for imagination come? All you said is that we separated when we came out of the trees.
Okay, every mammal, in my opinion, can do a little bit of imagination in terms of predicting what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So if I start running in the forest, my dog immediately assumes we're hunting a deer, makes a break to one side or the other to try and outflank the deer, and then drive the deer in front of me. So the dog is not correctly, but it is imagining what I want to do. Yeah. Imagining the next move is to me catch a deer.
So the chimpanzees just weren't imagining about tubers underground.
They weren't thinking about that. What a chimpanzee brain was very good at doing was finding where the next fruit tree was going to be ripe at the right time. It didn't take quite as much knowledge as in your head imagining something under the ground. Mm-hmm. The other thing that chimpanzees are very good at doing, and our ancestors must have been, would be that social component. Mm-hmm. So their imagination is often what is in the brain of another animal. And how are you going to manipulate that other animal? It's called the sort of Machiavellian intelligence hypothesis, that we evolved to both learn how to lie to each other and successfully lie to each other. And chimpanzees have done this. So, one of the early conversations with Coco, that's the gorilla, I guess, Coco pooed inside her trailer, and then when the handler came up to Coco and said, "Why is there poo in the trailer?" Coco said, "This homeless guy came in and he pooed in the trailer." And so, lying is something that's very, very deep in our evolution, but also detecting lying, knowing when someone has lied. And
those two would go together. Yes.
But beyond that, able to manipulate whole groups, right? So if there's a troop up to 70, 80, 90 other individuals in your troop, you need to have relationships with all of them, know how they are being manipulated and how they're manipulating you. You need to make alliances. You can't do something on your own. Mm-hmm. You need backup. So Jane Goodall, working with the chimps, not only discussed them, going to war, but saw much more of their time spent grooming each other, making associations with each other. Now, we don't know when language started. We don't imagine it was particularly advanced at this point. It would have been probably similar to what you would have seen in chimpanzees, so gestural, maybe a few vocalizations. But over the course of our evolution, all of those touch interactions that primates have, we would have kept that as a basic need and then added language interactions on top of that. So the social interaction is vital to our well-being, so that we need to touch each other. We need to communicate with each other. These are in some ways similar in our modern brains. Chimpanzees, it's all about the touching. So if a chimpanzee is sad, it will turn its back so that you can scratch its back. And humans need that same kind of interaction, and it's something that I really feel we are having problems with in our society. The lack of touching and interaction.
Yes, the epidemic of loneliness is,
and particularly among men and older men, this is happening, and it's very difficult because obviously a guy can't just go out and touch people. He will definitely get in trouble.
Wouldn't work.
It wouldn't work. It would be a bad idea.
Yeah.
But we need this as a species, and we can make do with conversation a little bit, right? Just having a conversation with someone fulfills a lot of those needs. But the touch is also a sort of underlying physiological need that it releases oxytocin and hormones that help relax us, and our stress hormones go down, so the corticosteroids are lowered in response to touch. And so without these things, we have more stress, and these are part of our physiological evolution, but also of our conscious evolution, right? Consciousness is not just evolved about how to play chess or something like that. Consciousness is the entire suite of interactions that we have with ourselves and the world around us, and we tend not to think of the consciousness, particularly of other animals. We tend to think of ourselves as the only conscious creature. But just as I was saying that Coco figured out a way to lie, I was lied to yesterday by a blue jay. The blue jay was sitting in a tree and wanted me to come out where it could see me better. I was sort of sitting on a porch behind a couple of bushes, and the blue jay wanted me to come out and stand in the open. So it went to a tree that I couldn't see just around the corner, started imitating a hawk, and it combined a couple of hawks. It sort of was a red-shouldered hawk plus an osprey, so it sounded like a hawk, but not one I knew, sort of doing a care, 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 and then sort of a hawk call and combining a couple of calls, and then switching into blue jay angry at a hawk call, so they're going ack, 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 ack at the hawk. So it was doing both sides of the fight. It was doing the hawk, and it was doing the blue jay mad at the hawk. For me. So that I then stood up, walked around the corner to see what this hawk was doing in the tree, out flew the blue jay, flew directly at me, looked me in the face 10 feet over my head, and went and flew into the woods. Now, if I hadn't been paying attention, this wouldn't have worked, right? So if I'm not listening for what blue jays say, they can't lie to me. But as soon as I start thinking about the world of animal communication, they're communicating all the time. Just like, your dog, your cat might be communicating with you. The rest of the world is. So I don't think communication at its sort of basic level is something brand new to humans. I think very few of our behaviors are unique to us, but we've taken many of them up to a much higher level. So obviously our linguistic ability far surpasses that of my dog or, your cat or something. And it's somewhat the same, strangely, with bipedalism. Bipedalism is a way of getting from place to place. And we generally think of ourselves as so much physically weaker than all the other animals. And it's true, but there's nothing that can come anywhere close to us. So, for example, there's a...
you mean in terms of
endurance,
movement.
Just sheer getting from one place to another. So there's a race in Australia that pits humans against horses over something like 40 miles. Maybe it's 120 miles. It's really far.
Yes.
And humans often win.
You mean one human against one human riding a horse?
Yes. And humans often, on their own, not on a horse, will win this race. Because our endurance it even surpasses that of wolves. Now, a wolf can obviously outrun you, but talking about just jogging for days Not that I would want to do it, but there are humans out there that can do it even beyond what a wolf would be able to do.
So you're saying we're built to survive.
We are built to survive and exercise in a way that maximizes our ability to travel on the fewest possible calories. So we need exercise, but we don't burn calories very quickly. We need calories and we store them really well. So everything is stacked against us in terms of how much exercise we need.
We're built for a consistent but not very fast movement.
Yeah, in many ways, I think of us as sort of chimpanzees' poor relations. Chimpanzees, I was mentioning, have a pretty easy life, but during the dry season, chimpanzees are going to have to walk further. They're going to have to start seeking out new forms of calories. They might even start hunting a little bit. You know, they'll take a stick and jab it into a tree hole to see if there's anything in the hole, and then pull out the piece of meat and share it that way. You know, they talk about prostitution as the oldest profession, but you can see it way back in the chimps. The only time a female is likely to ever get meat is from a male in exchange for a mating opportunity. So the males almost never share the meat, but they will in a very sort of barter kind of relationship. And so this is also built very deeply into our consciousness. And so why would the female be willing to do this? Is she needs a supply of extra calories to help, a developing fetus or an infant. And chimpanzees will also build relationships like this. So there'll be an alliance between males and females in exchange for future mating possibilities, even if they're not, she's not in estrus at that time. Humans are truly strange when it comes to reproduction. We're one of the few creatures that the females fool us into thinking they are receptive all the time, and they actually can, become pregnant quite a bit of the year, right? So out of every month, 2 weeks or so, they're receptive, and it's hard to tell that they're not the rest of the month. Whereas chimpanzees get a giant sexual swelling that is obvious from across the room, and every male knows it. But they will, knowing this period of time is coming up, will make alliances with males so that they can then choose the male that they get to mate with. And not just every male in the troop, which is how most females end up starting in the chimp groups. So this is another thing that is deeply part of our consciousness, is understanding that alliances need to be made to provide resources for children and for offspring, and that sexual relationships are absolutely part of these alliances, but they might not employ sex immediately, right? The sex might be implied in part of the entire alliance arrangement that's going to include things like food and resources and grooming each other and spending time with each other
done
by chimps.
Or sans language.
Yes. The language we have at that point would be vocalizations, facial expressions, gestures. There's different things to call another chimp over. But very much holding the entire group together based on this system of alliances. So consciousness is something that builds up in stages and pieces. So we don't know what the first hominins out on the Serengeti would have had as a consciousness, but we can assume that they had everything that the chimpanzees had, maybe plus a little bit extra because their brains got slightly bigger. And they would have had to do a few more things. They probably had to have a larger territory. That might have meant a larger group protecting that territory. They probably, they undoubtedly would have had to have a larger mental map of their resources just to know where things are going to be at the right times. They have to have a good sense of the seasons, right? They have to know what's going on in the rainy season, what's going to happen in the dry season. These are very, very different times in Africa, and if you're in the wrong place, you're not going to survive. So you have to be in the right place at the right time. It's not just the places. So all of these things are part of a developing mental map, development of consciousness, understanding what's happening in other people's brains, understanding how it's like what happens in your brain. So how do I lie to this person? How do I manipulate them?
That's some advanced imagination. Imagining what's happening in someone else's brain.
But it's what, the blue jay was doing, imagining what's in my brain. It was it could have been wrong. If I wasn't paying any attention, it would have just been making calls off into the trees and just a bird. But because I was listening, it imagined I was listening, and it happened to be right. And then it was able to fool me. So there's, when I was traveling in Java, there was a troop of macaques in the rainforest, and we were walking along in the rainforest, and they tried to get me to give them my garbage. So we'd had a little picnic, and there was a bag of food, and the macaques wanted the garbage. So they start off with a mother holding her little baby, and she's showing me the little baby trying to get the food from me by manipulating me. And she absolutely had a model in her brain of I would give her food because she had a little baby. And, I'm like, get away from me, you parasite. And, keep walking on. And the next, it was like, the three trolls or the three Billy Goats Gruff kind of thing. So the next one that comes is a full-grown dominant male macaque with really large fangs, which he shows to me.
Yeah, they can be intimidating.
And big muscles, which he's flexing. And I'm like, let's go. And I get ready to kick him if he comes at me.
There was no rock available?
That's later in the story. Okay. But yeah, he backs down, and then a few more feet there's another one, large, big macaque male, and I do the same thing, and I'm putting the food bag behind me, but now they've predicted me, so they run up my back, slash the bag of food, everyone grabs a piece, and there's like 6 monkeys, and then there's no monkeys, and there's no food. And it was all over in a blink of an eye, and they had completely predicted my actions and outsmarted me. And, they had a mental map.
They've done this again and again.
And they had a mental map of how I would react, and they had a plan, and they set themselves up along the path because they knew I was going to be there. And I fell into every one of their traps.
That sounds like our friend's story from the Diamond District.
Yeah, well, this is how people are. We make predictions of each other, and we are able to exploit them. That can be for robbery purposes.
So that's what the blue jay.
Yeah, the blue jay
was trying to do to you.
It was predicting me.
Right. And this is exactly what the macaques were doing. Yeah. So this happens across the animal kingdom at every level.
At every level, to the extent that things have brains, but things have more brains than you'd think. That, birds, we think of bird brains. They're actually really smart, particularly things like jays and crows are quite intelligent. There's crows out there that can make tools. They'll actually strip a stick and stick it into a hole and pull out a bug with it. And so, these kinds of capabilities that we think of as uniquely ours are throughout the animal kingdom, but we definitely also do them better. Mm-hmm. And we like to think of the gap between ourselves and the animal kingdom being based on our mentality. What I'm trying to say is, at least at the same level as we're that much better than them on our thoughts, we're that much more advanced on our bipedalism. Mm-hmm. Our ability to go long distances is as unique a human adaptation as our advanced consciousness is. It's something that other animals do. We have just specialized on it. And so we shouldn't think of ourselves...
Go on, I'm sorry. We shouldn't think of ourselves...
We shouldn't think of ourselves as specialists in, forming cities. We should think of ourselves very much as specialists in being super poor and maximizing resources, and then working together and against each other to get those resources. That our societies are what keep us alive, but society preying on other members of society is built in from the very beginning, with everything from robbery to prostitution.
So the unique things about us at this stage are the walking long distances, the endurance, the walking, and
that's pretty much it. I mean,
there's no other quality.
Not tremendously unique. We just have big teeth for grinding. Our teeth are larger than any other primates at this time, and we can walk really long distances. Our brains are ever so slightly larger, but we're following the same...
Well, you say it's the walking and the thinking.
The beginning of thinking. Right. So chimpanzees are remarkably intelligent animals already, right? So they're far advanced of the monkeys, which are advanced of, say, your dog or your cat. So we're already well along the path towards intelligence, but mostly for social reasons at this point, okay? And you don't need that big a brain because the monkeys can already do a pretty good job of it, okay? So we've grown our brain a little bit because you're never going to spend calories on something you don't need, especially in this environment, right? You're not going to have extra...
But we needed a little more because our environment changed.
Our environment got a little harder, and so our brain gets a little bit bigger. And so most of what our brain is probably doing is social interaction and the mental map of where we are. So understanding in time and space where the resources are, and then understanding what it would take to get other members of our troop to help us out, give us food when we need food, help us when we're sick, bring food to us if we need it, bring food to our babies if we need it, and basically keeping the whole system going needed just a little bit extra. And so that little bit extra brain is not a tremendous cost, but it's going to be something that we're spending calories on. And so given that we're specialists in not using up calories, it's a big deal that we've now grown our brain a little bit bigger. But seriously, what we spent our entire time doing would be chewing and walking. Can you chew gum and walk at the same time? We're literally evolved to do that.
Which explains my kid's love of gum.
Yeah, exactly. No, we are literally evolved to do that. We should have much harder gum. We should be chewing much more difficult foods. Yes, it will wear down our teeth, but our teeth are pretty tough, and it would give us much better jaw muscles. I actually have some interesting theories on orthodonture, that a lot of orthodonture is because we don't chew enough, which doesn't create enough jaw space for our teeth to come in properly. That, if you think about hunter-gatherers, they didn't ever have dentists, and they somehow got through their wisdom teeth erupting at the age of 20 without dying. Okay, so if they hadn't had room for their wisdom teeth, they all would have died.
Interesting.
And so we must have had larger jaws, and we definitely had larger teeth, so we even had larger jaws. And that would have been the only way right up until we became farmers. So we had much larger jaws till about 10,000 years ago. And we can see this in Aboriginal groups, particularly in Australia today. They have the largest teeth and jaws of any other group.
So we've been talking about millions of years ago. So what makes this transition from to the more contemporary farmers from the
Oh, we're so not up to farming.
We're not doing that.
We're not getting there.
That's future talk.
Farming is where everything goes wrong. That's when we become lazy and get cavities, and it all goes wrong. And we do still exercise, but we exercise badly, and we get bad backs.
It seems like such a better way to live.
It does, unless you think of the hunter-gatherer life as actually incredibly perfect. It's what we evolved for.
And what we're still evolved for even now.
Today. Yeah. So we evolved that millions of years of evolution to be a hunter-gatherer. Involves very little work every day. They actually can get most of their calories without working as long as a farmer does. It involves a lot of walking, but if you don't mind walking, that's not so bad.
I don't mind walking.
So it's a lot of walking. At this point, it would have been some digging. Later in our evolution, it would be some hunting, but not more than a couple hours a day at most. And then the rest.
Were we digging with our hands, or were we digging with tools?
We would assume
kind of make a difference to
that the Australopithecines would have been able to have a stick. We don't know because sticks wouldn't have survived. But we know that chimpanzees certainly use simple tools like a stick or a rock to dig. So I would assume that they would have done that with a stick or a rock. We didn't actually end up with fingers well adapted to digging. And for those first 4 million years, our fingers actually were long and thin still, which were very good for climbing trees, not good for holding things. Even that stick for digging or a rock for digging, we could hold it, but it would have been a very poor grip, just sort of fingers onto palm, not a finger thumb grip. And so we could hold things, certainly chimps can, but these were fingers that were evolved for swinging from trees, climbing up a tree very quickly. And we think they spent a lot of time in trees. So, for example, Lucy, one of the very early Australopithecine fossils that was found, we think fell out of a tree. And so she has broken femur and pelvis that indicates she fell 40 feet out of a tree and then fell immediately into a water where she happened to be preserved. And, that's how we have her fossil. There's not a lot of fossils because not everyone falls out of a tree into water immediately, but
fell out of a tree and rolled right into water.
Pretty much, yeah. Within this a day or two of having fallen out of the tree was in water and then covered. So maybe a flood came and put sediments over her before the again, Serengeti full of scavengers. So along comes a scavenger, cracks all the bones. Yeah. She had to have been covered over pretty quickly. But the point is that we were still very much needing trees. So this was an area where, yes, it's Serengeti, but there's these patches of trees within the Serengeti. And so we started off as a jungle creature living in trees, and then we're walking from patch of tree to patch of tree to patch of tree. But each patch of trees only has a certain amount of resources. So we maximize the resources we get out of that patch of trees, store as much of it as we can as fat, and then we walk to the next patch of trees. And we sleep in the trees during the day, and we come out and we dig around them. The trees are almost always near water, so there's a lot of water nearby. Now, it's interesting if you think about chimpanzees and gorillas compared to monkeys. They actually have less fur on them than monkeys. And so one of the other things you might notice about humans is we're slightly less furry than the monkeys are. And so this is probably happening during the same period of time where we're moving out onto the grassland. And so in general, there's a correlation with the larger the primate is, the less fur it has. And this would have set us up nicely. For whatever reason, almost none of the other primates sweat. It doesn't make a lot of sense to sweat in a rainforest. There's almost 100% humidity, so you don't get any evaporative cooling.
Right.
So we move out onto the Serengeti as these furry, non-sweating apes, and we're getting hot really quickly, and we're being eaten all the time. So we have to figure out a way to divide our habitat into a way that avoids predators and allows us to walk from place to place and scavenge food without getting eaten by lions all the time. So all of the predators on the Serengeti are most active during the morning and the evening and sometimes at night. So we climb into the trees at night to avoid that whole period, and then we get up and we move around during the middle of the day when it's super hot.
The hottest part of the day when the other animals don't want to move around.
And so what we evolved the ability to do is to sweat off of a naked skin. So we lost our fur, and we sweat, and that evaporatively cools us, and we need a lot of water.
How long does a transition like that take? That sounds like that would take a very long time.
All of these things were selected for very highly. That's why I said we don't have a lot of intermediary fossils.
Oh, so the things that did not, they would have died very quickly.
Right, and we don't have any fossils of sweat glands or hair. So we really don't know. But what you see is a very quick transition to being a biped. So if you think of a dog skull, it has a hole at the back of the skull, the foramen magnum, where the spinal cord attaches at the back of the skull. If you think of a human skull, it has a hole at the bottom of the skull to hold the skull on so that you can look forward and look instead of looking straight up, right? So that happened very, very quickly. As we move to being bipeds, the central foramen magnum appears very early in the fossils. A couple other things, if you look at a chimpanzee's pelvis, it has these two long things in the back to sort of hold the lower back while you're bent over and walking on your knuckles. If you look at a human's pelvis, it looks like a bowl. So that's for a vertical-oriented organism with a cup-shaped or bowl-shaped pelvis to hold your internal organs in place as you're walking around. That also occurs fairly quickly. So these adaptations where you couldn't survive without it happen very quickly. Quickly could easily be 500,000 years or 1 million years, and we don't have any fossils from that intermediary one. We have a lot of fossils that are partway there.
An evolutionary quick movement is something that could take between 500,000.
Well, this was a brand new ecosystem. This was as large an adaptation as birds getting wings, right? So a African ape moving onto a grassland. Apes have never been on a grassland before. We're the first ones to figure it out. It was by necessity. Our jungle dried out. And it's a whole new ecosystem niche that we can now exploit. And so it's you get what's called radiation and speciation into all the different possible habitats. So some of these are better walkers than others. Some of them have longer legs. Some of them have shorter legs. Some of them have stronger bones. They maybe did more digging. Others have even larger jaws. They all have large jaws, but some of them have really, really large jaws, and they could have been chewing ones that the other, more gracile Australopithecines would not have been able to chew. So the groups are radiating into many different species. So it's not a straight sort of line between chimpanzees and us, but it's a very bushy family tree. Yeah. And
nonetheless, all of them had the ability to adapt, or they would have just died.
Well, yeah, I mean, everything is always adapted to whatever it happens to be in. It's just that this is a very new environment, and so the adaptations are happening very rapidly at this point.
And with great variety.
Yeah, and it turns out there's also a lot of just it doesn't always have to be evolutionary adaptation. Now, that's what we're talking about. But the body can adapt to a new environment on its own. So there's there is a practice in Japan where they force macaques to walk on two legs and act in plays as a samurai monkey.
That doesn't sound right.
And they force / encourage them to walk up to 2 kilometers a day, like holding their hands as they walk along up and down the street. And these macaques actually developed many of the adaptations you would expect in a biped because they're forced to become bipeds.
They developed them in an individual?
In an individual. So obviously you don't see the skeletal adaptations that you would expect to see in a biped in terms of the way the hip sockets are going to be going in.
You wouldn't see an evolutionary change in an individual.
Or the way, when we walk, our knees are directly under us. They're not on either side. When a chimpanzee walks, its knees are under its hips. And so it tends to go from side to side, whereas humans can walk straight forward. These macaques don't get knees directly under them because that's just a thing they don't have. They haven't evolved that far. But they are able to walk as bipeds for over a mile every day. And they are able to stand on stage and do their scenes very well. So, yeah, you could imagine that a chimpanzee can take a couple of steps as a biped. They're not very good at it. What kind of adaptation would that give you right away? You're in a grassland. You need to get to the next patch. Simply standing on 2 legs gets you above the grass, right? So now you can see if there's anything else out there, and you can see where the next tree is. And so then you go back down to all fours, but now you're lost. So you spend more and more time being upright. Now, I'm not saying that this is Lamarckian evolution where one chimpanzee passed down acquired characteristics to the next generation, but that there is an advantage right away to having some of these pre-adaptations.
And the ones that can't do that instantly have a disadvantage.
Right. And so it was selected for very, very quickly. And so you see adaptations going in a bunch of different directions, but all of them allowing for these longer distances. Yeah, so I want to continue on with these discussions and sort of move us through evolution until we get to talking about the evolutionary history in relation to our modern existence. But we haven't even gotten big brains yet. So the next time, what I'd like to do is start talking about how we got these larger brains, the beginning of genus Homo, moving from the Australopithecines, which were our first 4 million years of evolution, basically bipedal chimpanzees, to now the next 2 million years up till now, where we have large brains and we have the capabilities of a large-brained hunter out on the Serengeti, which changes everything. Being a occasional scavenger and a digger of tubers is quite different from what our genus then evolves into, which is hunters with tools and fire and a whole new class of living. So just like you have adaptive radiation with the bipeds moving out of the Serengeti, becoming a large-brained tool user is another kind of ecological niche that we are then able to exploit and gives us an entire new set of capabilities. And so that's what I'd like to talk about next time.
I'm actually excited.
Excellent.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.